All right. Hi. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for choosing to come to Agile HR. Want to keep this very conversational and open and a dialogue. So feel free at any time, raise your hand if you want to ask a question, if you want to interject. At the end, I want to open it up to you all, and I want to hear about what's happening in your organization. So what are some things that are progressive that your HR organizations are doing? What is important to you as a technologist, or any just general comments, feedback, questions, insights that you've gleaned from the session. So thank you again. My name is Leigh Shaffner, and I am the Executive Director of Talent Management for Comcast Technology and Product Team. So I've been with Comcast for about a year and a half now. Actually, it's coming up on 2 years. Prior to working at Comcast, I was at Spotify, and prior to Spotify, I was in the digital ad space at Digitas and Razorfish. So this is a topic that's really important to me, and I think that it's been really interesting to watch the industry transform. So I want to get to know you all. Anybody in the room an HR practitioner? All right, excellent. How about managers? Do we have managers? Excellent, thank you. And okay, great. So it's good to know the audience. So we're going to start talking a little bit about some theory. I'm going to bring some research to the table, and it's research that Comcast we've partnered with Mercer to get some education on, as well as Deloitte, a guy by the name of Josh Burson. And so we've been reviewing all this research to help us shape and drive our different talent strategies and approaches. But then I'm really going to focus and hone in on performance management and what's happening in the performance management space. It's sort of been like the hot topic, and there's tons of things happening with Accenture, Deloitte, Microsoft about the rush and the move to nix performance ratings. So I'll pull in some data that we got from Mercer, and we can go through that. But then I'm going to talk to you a bit about what we're doing at Comcast as the first step in a 2 to 3 year journey to reevaluating this approach. And then I've got a couple slides just on like what the future looks like, and then we want to hear from you. Okay, so let's talk about why do we need agile organizations? So we're in a time and space where we've had accelerated globalization, and there's also a talent and skills imbalance. So the market's changing, and there's not a surplus, there's a demand for specialized skill set. And we also have the emergence of big data, which gives us different types of insights. And what we're seeing is the workforce is transforming. It's younger, it's more connected, it's more mobile. Actually, just last year, the millennials moved to the forefront of the workforce, and they overtook the boomers for the first time, with 75 million millennials in the workforce. Also, again, the workplace is changing as well, where it's more team-oriented, more performance-driven. So we've got new models for people's careers, as well as new models for people working, which is leading us to a need for an agile enterprise, where we are creating new models for management and supporting our managers and our people in different ways to enable them to achieve business objectives. So thinking about like the majority of our population now, 75 million is millennials, and we still need to have an account for diversity, but the shift to the millennial population is helping to drive the culture change, the paradigm change. So we're seeing a difference in loyalty and turnover. Also, I think that this is something I want to hone in is 80% of employees want to give performance appraisals to their bosses. So we see a desire for an interactive feedback loop. Also, one thing we're hearing, something that we talk about too, is sometimes candidates today aren't looking for a career, but they're looking for an experience. So you have to understand like the different needs of the population. And also too, this is I think a big change is it's no more about just the perks and benefits or the compensation, but a lot of employees are shifting to where they're looking for a company that is that has a sense of purpose, and that there is sort of they believe in the vision that it's driving towards. So when CEOs were asked to define agility in The Economist, this is how they described it. Rapid decision-making, high-performance culture, flexible management of teams, and transparent availability of information. And when we look deeper to see which business functions contribute the most to agility, at the top of the list was sales, marketing, customer service, operations, but also human resources, in providing the right kind of coaching, consultation, for that decision making. So our leaders are in a tough, fast-paced environment where they're having to deal with a lot of different stimulus. And Agile permeates all aspects of the organization, including human resources. So there's a lot of study and work done into looking at Agile management principles, Agile leadership, Agile learning, and Agile talent acquisition. So you're seeing a shift to more coaching and development. You're seeing the ability to pivot, that goals are updated frequently. Within learning, you're seeing a desire for continuous learning environments, where there's also a focus on a learning culture. So not just your online learning or your classroom learning, but how do you really look at a well-rounded learning experience? So Josh Bersin says that the Agile model for HR states that human resources, the job is not to implement controls and standards and drive execution, but rather to facilitate and improve organizational agility. So this really changes and shifts HR focus and mission to driving programs that create adaptability, innovation, collaboration, and speed. So there's new rules and new roles and expectations for HR. And a lot of HR professionals, it's a new day and age. No more is it the personnel department. No more is it just like the compliance or the legal or regulatory or safety. There's a whole new set of expectations for HR practitioners. So we are now being asked and tasked and playing a role where we're focusing on adaptability, innovation, speed, where we're trying to create programs and systems and strategies that'll foster expertise, collaboration, and getting back to that, making sure we're making smart decisions in an age of information overload and an age of speed. So we've seen, Bersin lays it out well, that there's been sort of 4 phases or change drivers in the HR transformation. So going from a place of control to service, to support and consultation in being actual business partners with leaders. In addition, you've also seen HR structures change from something that's centralized to something that's rationalized to something that is actually optimized, where you have highly trained and empowered partners that have the right kind of intelligence and expertise and are able to network with centers of excellence, pull the right information to the table. So what are some of the challenges for modern HR leaders? So we need to develop leaders. Thinking back to that earlier slide and the different, there's Agile leadership, Agile management. A myth is that leaders are just at the top, and I think one of the Agile principles is that it's leaders in an Agile workforce are spread throughout the organization. So we've got a younger organization with different demands, And we still have technology that's stovepiped, archaic, not with a easy user interface, low friction or gateway to entry. So it causes drag on the workforce. And we're still really weak in performance management and succession planning. And CEOs want HR to solve these problems. Yes. Oh, is there a mic?
Yeah.
Great.
Would you like me to use that or just yell?
Actually, we want to use the mic so we're able to capture your question. Great.
Thanks. I'm just curious what succession means and what succession management is. Great.
No, that's a good question. So I think what's interesting is organizations so we're going to get into performance management deeper in a second. But I think what's been interesting about performance management is very backward focused. Backward focus, how did you perform? There's a legal element to it. There's a rack and stack compensation element to it. So performance management and talent management sometimes are partitioned. And what we're trying to do at Comcast is actually bring them closer together. So talent management is more forward focused. So that looks at not only your performance, but also your potential. So how many moves do you have in you? Where do you think we can stretch you and grow you? And a lot of companies use something called a 9-box, with performance and potential being an axis to help organizations look strategically at workforce planning and mobility. Another factor that layers into that is succession planning. So organizations will go through cycles where leaders will name their successor, 1 or 2 successors, and sometimes say are they ready now, are they ready in a year, and then that information is reviewed and organized as part of sort of development planning, so that way that talent moves aren't reactive and that they're done with, they're more deliberate and conscious in trying to help to cross-pollinate talent, create tours of duty. I'm not sure if anybody's read the new LinkedIn book. It's a good one. It's called The Alliance. I highly recommend it. And it talks about tours of duty. And in order to help to diversify skill set, to create a breadth in experience that can then help you prepare you for different types of roles versus a linear track. So what we found is the succession planning, so performance processes are weak, and we'll get into more of why. But succession also, those processes in companies, it's not done. If it's done, it's a shelf exercise. And then sometimes even if it is reviewed, it's reviewed, but then it's not actualized and operationalized. So that's something that we're actually trying to work on at Comcast and helping to sort of like dial it up with how well we think proactively. So that way then you're prepared for 1, 3, 5 years. So when you look at like what an HR business partner wears a lot of hats, but what are the most high impact activities that a business partner does? A lot of it's just more time spent consulting, less time spent serving. So providing decision support, trying to help them partner in creating workforce strategy, and coaching both executives and managers. So here are some from Josh Burson. These are some more specific examples of Agile HR strategies. And I bolded a couple because I think this helps to sort of set it up for moving into performance management. So it's helping to really be a partner to deliver strong, focused mission and values, creating transparent systems where there's visibility for goals, what projects who's working on, and who are experts that you can consult with and advise. So creating more of like a systems network or systems thinking. creating a feedback-focused model, as well as building peer-to-peer rewards and recognition. So let's dive in, and again, there's lots of different topics, but we're going to focus on performance management transformation today. So the market practice on performance management is coming into question, and I think a lot of companies are struggling and wondering if they're doing performance management the right way. So according to Burson, only 8% of organizations believe their performance management process is worth what they're putting into it. So we need to actually clarify and refocus, what is the purpose of performance management? Is it performance improvement? Is it legal documentation? Is it employee motivation? So really trying to hone in, and at Comcast, we've asked, what is the cutting edge thinking on performance management? So thought I'd insert a little bit of humor. How does this resonate? So I think that there's really a desire to have a process that's valuable, that's not demotivating, that's not distracting, and is not misused. There's been a high level of dissatisfaction with performance management in the market. So you can see 3%, Mercer found 3% reported their performance management systems actually deliver value. 48% of companies are evaluating their plan to review performance management. So you can see a growing number of companies are sort of looking for alternative approaches. So Microsoft was on a 3-year journey, and they now have no ratings. At Juniper Network has a really interesting practice. Again, no ratings, but they literally say you're a J player or you're not a J player, and it's all focused on feedback. Accenture's come out lately as well, sort of on this topic.
Where's Comcast at?
So you know what? Actually, I'm getting right into that. Thank you. That's a great question. Thank you. Yes. So how much I have a couple more research slides before I get into Comcast's approach, and actually it's the approach that Comcast is piloting this year for technology and product. The rest of Comcast is on a legacy process. So performance management, it's estimated that 200 hours per manager per year are put into performance management. And you can see Adobe even estimated it higher at 80,000 hours. So companies are really starting to tally the cost, and they're getting sticker shock, and they're wondering, it's a bureaucratic check the box process, is it worth it? Oh, we have another question.
So is that per person, like 200 hours per manager per year per person, or total?
I think it's probably a total.
Well, then it's a fixed.
But per manager, so that's for every manager. Yes.
So it's 4 hours a week?
Which
10% of the year.
Yeah, which it's like if you're on a 20-80 hour year.
I mean, that's a really small number. It might cost a lot as a manager's salary.
Yep.
It's a really small number.
But I think the point is that in these old processes, they don't feel like they're getting the impact. It's like the impact and the outcome that it's driving and the behavior shift and how it's driving performance or results, it's not correlating.
So how many employees are they estimating each manager is managing for that 200 hours per year?
So let's see.
I think what you should recognize is that the 200 hours per year is only spent on things like sitting in training sessions, filling out forms, and delivering evaluations. It's not necessarily actually managing performance, spending time
Yes.
with the employees. That's the reason why it's not.
I think that's a good clarifying point. Thank you. So we also, Mercer also looked into what if ratings demotivate employees. So, we're social beings, and when you get a numeric rating, you get a label, what does it do to you? So how does it actually motivate you and drive the right behavior change? And what actually Juniper did actually a lot of, Juniper's model is based in a lot of like neuroscience. And the reason they got rid of ratings, and they were one of the early companies to go to this, was they felt that it triggered a fight or flight response. And that, especially too, when it was done in, that there was all this build up to an end of year rating. You got an end of year rating a couple months after the year ended, and you didn't feel like you had an opportunity to influence or change, or the feedback loop was broken. So Mercer talks about the SCARF model as far as like the neuro research and the fight or flight response. So the factors that are triggered in you is your status. So am I considered better or worse than others? Certainty. Am I certain that my hard work will get me a better rating? Autonomy. Do I have control over what happened? Relatedness. How do I make myself look better than others? And fairness. Am I being treated fairly? And so what they found is that performance reviews trigger sort of all those feelings in that pattern. So what are companies doing? So we know it's sort of broken and it's not working. So what are companies doing today? So what Mercer laid out for us is that the emerging processes in performance management are shifting towards, again, eliminating ratings and using a combination of the below. So crowdsourcing feedback to get a sort of a holistic, balanced, well-rounded view where a manager can take themes and not outliers. Coaching, shifting towards coaching models versus it being very retroactive and this is what you did and now that's it and here's your rating and we're moving on. It changing into more of a coaching and a development model that's more continuous and relevant and timely with flexible check-ins and the ability to adapt. So the ability to, you set an expectation, you give feedback, coaching, development, you see how that person progresses, you reset an expectation. Also too, we're not going to get into this today, and I know this is a hot topic, but a lot of companies are also delinking and decoupling compensation from performance management.
Can we go back to Juniper? You said they eliminated you're either J or not a J. Isn't that just a performance rating with a binary outcome?
So yeah, and actually what's interesting about Juniper's model is they actually do a calibration, and they do almost a little bit like succession planning, where it's like they're sort of placing people, like, is this person well placed? Is this person ready for their next opportunity? So they have a bucketing system that they calibrate to, but it's funny because it's behind the scenes. So it's behind the scenes and it's not something that's shared with the employee, and then what's shared with the employee is you're a J player or you're not a J player. And so they've found that that's sort of pulled down some of this, like the reaction or the fixation with the rating. But there still is a way that they calibrate or that they discuss and they look at relativity. Which I think it's interesting because it's not, if you look at companies like Microsoft or you look at Accenture, like they really have gone to no ratings. Like it is a feedback model. So Juniper's a little bit, I guess.
I get the feedback, but how do you deliver the message you're not a J player?
Yep.
And not trigger a player?
Well, actually, that's a good question and a good clarifying point, because the Juniper headquarters is like right beside the Comcast Sunnyvale headquarters, and so I actually had the opportunity to go meet with their chief human resource officer who built this, and I actually asked him that question, and he said, when you tell someone they're not a J player, it means they're not a fit for the organization, and they actually want that person to leave. And so what ends up happening is he said that the outcome is, instead of putting people on a performance improvement plan, having severance, that when someone hears like they're not a fit, they actually then self-select. And so he said that they've seen like a downtick in their severance. But he said it's very few and far between, and that you wouldn't hear, let's say somebody's in the wrong role at Juniper, that's like one of their rack and stack buckets, is like, this person's not in the right role, but we need to get them. It's like they're good talent, they're specialized, we need to get them somewhere else. So if it's somebody who's not a J player, it's like it's almost destructive, and it's not. Good question. So a little bit of like, sort of, okay, how is it changing? So what is the shift? So what we're seeing in the industry, and I think Burson laid it out really well here, is so it's changing and shifting from a top-down annual process with very rigid, cascading, hierarchical goals, an annual event with a lot of overhead, forms and ratings and forced rankings and comp that's tied to it, where you don't feel like you've got the ability of the art and the science of comp decisions, and different ways to pull levers, that we're shifting to a feedback-based model that is agile, that it's weekly, monthly check-ins, simple tools, mobile, easy gateway to entry, focused on development, and that the drivers of culture come from sort of within versus from HR. So one of the aspects of this approach is crowdsourcing. So there's a lot of new platforms on the scene. So it's interesting because the technology landscape with performance management or talent management, there's some big players out there that I'm sure your companies are on, but they're 10, 15, 20 years old. And they don't really, a lot of them have been trying to do add-ons, but they may come from a place of more rack and stack or control. So there's a lot of new vendors on the scene that are coming at it from are reimagining it and coming at it from a different angle and approach to enable things like crowdsourced feedback. But I mean, there's pros and cons to everything. So the benefits is it helps to sort of create personal accountability. So it's like you're not just accountable to your manager anymore and pleasing your manager, that there's sort of a collective whole to the system about the culture that you're creating, the expectations that you're creating. And it's really appropriate in organizations that have project-based teams where maybe your manager may not be on your team. I think about, I started my career in consulting, and at Accenture, I had an admin manager. So my admin manager was on an entirely different account, and he would do my review, and he would then interview and talk with people on all the different accounts that I worked on. So it works well for those types of organizations, and also it allows for more recognition and rewards. The considerations is you have to have a culture where there's a safety to provide feedback. So has anybody read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team? I just read it over vacation. So in the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, it's like you have to have trust. You have to have trust in order to have safety, to have conflict. And I think that sometimes in organizations where there may not be trust, there may be a lack of willingness or a safety to provide feedback. One thing also too, as I think one thing we are considering and looking at is with crowdsourcing or with 360s, there may be ratings fatigue. So the coaching model, and this is, so you'll see, oh, sorry, yes.
I have a question about the crowdsourcing of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Are you planning this to be manager-led or team-led?
So the model can be different in different organizations. And I'll be able to talk to you in a bit about what we're doing at Comcast in technology and product, but sometimes, so you'll see in a second that our recognition is sort of organically fueled, that like if someone wants to recognize someone that they can sort of give them a shout out. With 360s, with 360 reviews, we are going to incorporate that into our Q3 check-in, and the employee will initiate and pick who they'd like to provide feedback, and then the manager will review it and may remove or may add. So I think that what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing in research is that even with crowdsourcing, there's sort of more of a collective nature of it, that it's like it can be fueled from the population of the employee, but also too recommended or reviewed by the manager. So there's sort of more collectivity versus a siloedness to it. Good question. So at Comcast, we're going to be in technology and product, we're going with a feedback-based coaching model. And actually what you can see is there's two, and I'll get to this slide in a second. So Burson sort of lays the spectrum out as there's a competitive assessment model or a coaching and development model. And about 70% of the companies are actually shifting more towards a coaching and development model. So with the sort of the legacy, the competitive assessment model, the underlying theory is that evaluating people against their goals and against each other will create a higher performance organization. Whereas the coaching and development model, it identifies strengths and weaknesses and tries to optimize on those strengths. And also when you look at weaknesses, trying to pair people up and develop them and bring them along. So the coaching and development model, I think, indexes more towards collaboration. So with the underlying belief in the coaching and the development models, we want the right people with the right behaviors in the organization. Whereas I think that the competitive model is more, I think it's more almost on like a continuum of high to low. So a bit more about sort of what we're seeing, what Mercer was seeing in the industry with the coaching model. So how often should coaching sessions occur? So what they're recommending is, and what they're seeing is quarterly at minimum. And also too, I think this is an important point. Coaching should not be seen, or performance management shouldn't be seen as an event. Because I think some of like, okay, it's your review. We're going to sit down and give you your review. It's an event and there's all this buildup. And so I think that sometimes there's different like emotions that come with that, or hesitancy. So it shouldn't be an event, but rather an ongoing process. Again, getting back to sort of what we were talking about, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. What does a manager need? A trusting relationship, a growth mindset, being committed to the process. So making sure that conversations, and not allowing the coaching conversations to shift to short-term deadlines. So I think that that's one of the potential impacts or negatives of this model of the short term, is you don't want to just keep focusing on the short term. You need to create the right balance between sort of what's your annual objective, what's your long-term objective, and then breaking that down. And I think also too, one thing we're looking at, has anybody read the book Daring Greatly? I highly recommend it. If you haven't read it yet, you can also check out a TED Talk. There's a TED Talk on Brené Brown, was featured on Oprah. But she talks about, and this is actually something we're going to be probably rolling out at Comcast in our technology and product group, is how to create the right manager-employee relationship, or create the right relationship so there's openness and willingness to receive. So it talks a lot about vulnerability, and also this reminded me, it's like you may not always have the right answer. So in seeking understanding and creating the right So we're recognizing and realizing that we need to make sure we talk about what it feels like, what it looks like to give coaching and to give feedback. So here's a little bit about, so Google, in 2009, Laszlo Bock, set out to build better bosses at Google. And so they shifted to more of a coaching model. And what they rolled out, they found that the problem was that the research was showing that most of the bosses at Google were just not too hot. And that were one of the 3 main reasons people were leaving the company. So they did some research on what factors would make an effective manager. And I think what's interesting is, Google's an organization that's very focused on data, on analytics, on being highly technical. If you see the 8 behaviors, having key technical skills so you can help advise your team is purposely at the bottom. So that is important, and that's one of the key behaviors of an effective manager. But it's something that, it comes after everything else. I think what's interesting is they said, Mr. Bock said, we were able to have statistically significant improvement in manager quality for 75% of our worst performing managers. And the results, they said, were completely available and seen in feedback members from the team. Here's a case study from, do you mean to? Good. Okay. It's a case study from Adobe. So in 2011, Adobe's HR team scrapped their rating system after their engagement results identified a need to change. And so they implemented check-ins. So ongoing discussions between the employees and the managers about goals, career development. And they provided detailed strategies for providing feedback that include authenticity, showing positive intent, being direct and concise, allowing space for questions and clarity, and allowing to seek understanding both ways, providing tangible examples and suggestions, creating a plan of action with accountability, as well as expressing acknowledgement and appreciation. So I think that so it's a little bit about some case studies, Google and Adobe. And so 10 factors, something else that struck me in the research that I thought I'd pull into this was Burson cited 10 factors in a modern, healthy performance management process. So getting back to, it's like we talked earlier, it's like what's motivating people? It's that philosophy, the purpose, the culture. That's number one. Not creating a rigid approach, but allowing goal setting to be a little more agile, local, and meaningful. Creating check-ins, and so a lot of this we already covered. Reducing the impact of ratings, focusing on coaching and development, redesigning compensation, a culture of recognition, eliminating steps and simplifying, using metrics, and train and develop managers carefully. So one thing that really stuck out to us as we were reading this research was like a feedback model and recognition. And this resonated with me, that recognition drives retention. So Burson did this study, and they saw that recognition could drive as much as a 31% reduction in voluntary turnover and increase employee engagement. So that leads to like, what are we doing at Comcast in technology and product? So we're reimagining it with a partner called Reflective. So it's so it's not about the tool, but the tool's important. So it's more about, everything we've talked about. What's your philosophy and approach? What outcomes are you driving? Why are you doing it? Are you building the capabilities in your managers? But you also need sort of a platform and a user interface and a tool that's going to help, again, easy gateway of entry, low friction. So we went with Reflective, and Reflective is about 2 years, 2 years old. Pinterest, Lyft, I think maybe Disney are on their platform. And we initially thought, do you build or do you buy? The build versus buy. When you think about buying, a lot of the big box solutions we just felt were going to be too heavy with a help desk. You couldn't customize it. At Spotify, I saw them go through build. So they built their own solution or their own system, and then it became all about the tool. And they missed the boat on the process, the change management, the communication. So we felt like this was the right balance, and they've been a great partner with us for the past couple months, and they're very adaptable. So I'd say probably the 4 pillars is real-time feedback, morale and recognition, goals, and performance reviews. So we shifted our approach from the focus on the ratings, something that was annual, static, formulaic, focusing only on goals and what you achieved, something that was top-down, and you had to use a calculator to figure out what somebody's rating would be. And then when you were doing calibration sessions and you wanted to move things around, you ended up having to change and jigger things, and we're shifting to something that's more, again, coaching, feedback, aligns with our culture as Agile, focuses on not just what you do, but how you do it, and creates accountability. Yes?
So our company, we had a bell curve.
Yes.
What happens here?
So we had a bell curve in the past, and we're moving from a 5 scale to a 3 scale, and we are still going to have calibration sessions where we talk about relativity, to use that as a factor to influence the distribution of compensation dollars. But we haven't totally locked in on this yet, but I'm going to lobby that, and I almost pulled a slide in on this, and I wish I would have now. I'm going to lobby that it's like we sort of put the bell curve to the side, or maybe it's a different type of curve, because I think what some of the research in the industry is saying is it's actually not a bell curve. It's actually more of like a tailed. And what happens in a bell curve is you have like a limited pot of money. And so then sometimes it sort of puts the tails, especially the high performance tail, you're not able to exponentially reward the high performer. I also have an issue with trying to say you're gonna pay for performance or differentiate on a merit, because I don't think that a 5% merit feels that much different than a 3%. And I think that what we're seeing is we've actually done a lot of compensation research lately, is that we are seeing that we aren't progressing our high performers fast enough, and that we're getting salary compression. And so the people that have stayed at Comcast or with technology product the longest, some are lagging. And so we've got to find a different way to be able to apply those compensation dollars and reward the high performers and move them faster. And actually, I think there's been some really interesting research lately, sorry, one more point, and then also, that early stage engineers right out of school, that an engineer in their first, second, third year, that their salary is jumping like double digits. Like a star entry-level performer will go like up 20% year over year. And so we need to be able to build compensation philosophies, reward philosophies that are going to stay market competitive. And so I think but sometimes I think that when we think we're going to achieve it in a merit, that's not it's like we got to separate the merit from, yeah, the great question, thank you.
So in an Agile team, how do you tell who is the best performer? I'm asking this because I have managed And I gave up. So 25 years ago, I gave a pot of bonus money and said to the team, how would you like to distribute this bonus? Because the way I would do it is $2 grand to everyone, and that's back when 2 grand then. So I honestly do not understand how you decide who the highest performers are in the actual team if you're outside the team.
Yeah, and I'm an advocate of pushing compensation decisions out and lower in an organization. So one of the things that I'm not a fan of with the bell curve is the bell curve takes the power out of your hands. It's like you've got to hit a certain spot in the curve, and then because you're in this spot in the curve, it hits to this rating, and then because you're in this bucket, you get this. And it's very formulaic and rigid, and then there's this appearance of fairness with it, because then you can put it out and it's like, okay, this is, but in actuality, it's like a compensation decision, it's like there's a science, but there's an art to it as well. Like there's other factors you need to look at. So what is the market demand for that skill? How specialized is that person's skill set? What is the market demand for that skill set? What's the availability of that skill set and that talent on your team? Are you at a deficit for that skill set? Is that hot in the industry where there's a risk of losing that talent? I think also too, what impacted that person drive? So, that's like the what. So what's their scope? What did they achieve in tying to business objectives? But also how? Like how did they do it? So are they emulating the culture? Are they fostering and developing healthy teams and helping to develop other talent? So I think that there's like a number, it's a tough decision. It's a tough decision, and there's a lot of factors. And I think the thing is this is where I think HR organizations need to build the right kind of processes that can enable an understanding or an awareness of the complexity of it. So it is a complex decision. That's a great question. Good point. Yes.
So I guess following up on that, what's your view, to address the compensation gap? So if you say that you can't, the solution is not through performance reviews, how do you address the need to, especially from a finance perspective, how do you justify, convince your finance partners that, let's say, compensation on the West Coast needs to be more scaled to meet the demand of the market, to retain talent, as well as that the growth rate and the bonuses or additional compensation that come with good performance, or even just the fact that the employee stayed. How do you justify, how do you convince your finance partners that that's what needs to be done?
That's a great question, and actually that's something that I'm literally in the thick of right now with our partners and our leadership. Part of it is we're looking at our philosophies. So what is our compensation philosophies for different regions, also for different segments. So there may be, let's say machine learning, artificial intelligence, we're going to take a compensation philosophy that's more aggressive, but then maybe there's a talent or a skill set where the market's diluted, and we're going to take a pay less than market. So we're trying to be a little more thoughtful and deliberate about not just having one philosophy, but having very targeted philosophies. The second thing is there's a lot of different compensation levers. So we have, there's your merit, but then we have a rolling promotion and adjustment process, and we also then have an annual bonus. So right now, our annual bonus is partially paid in quarters, partially paid annually, and it's tied to a lot of company indicators. So managers and leaders and executives in our group, they don't get that pot of money that they can make decisions with it. So there's not an accountability, an empowerment. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to assess our bonus model and maybe shift it or change it and bring more of the compensation pot back in-house so that executives and leaders can have that to dole out meaningfully to sort of high pressure areas. So I think that some of it's like, while we may not be able to influence the top line, we try to sometimes look at the mix or sort of the ways or the processes or the accountabilities. Good questions. So this is pulled a slide from our launch. So we just launched this about a month ago. And you know, we want a process that's going to reflect our culture and that's going to be all about people's development. So a lot of that comes from clear expectations, 1. 2, it's like what you've heard throughout this presentation. So feedback that's meaningful and timely, as well as an integrated technology. And I'm going to show you some screenshots of Reflective here in a second. So our framework, our performance management framework has 3 pillars. So what you do, the goals, how you do it, which is the competencies and your behaviors. So we've defined behaviors at each career level, as well as that crowdsourced 360 feedback. We have, in the past, our model was 75% was your goals had different weightings, 25% was living the credo, and that 25% broke down, and so it was all, it all had to add up, and there was all this math. So now, when it gets to your performance impact and your end of year rating, it's going to be about themes. So it's going to be about themes in performance, not the outliers, but again, incorporating what, how, and a little more broad. We also have a recognition element that we're weaving in, and you'll see the tool in a second here, but we're doing a bit of a call to our operating principles. So our operating principles were just released last year, and they're really relevant for technology and product, and they tie to innovation. So I think what's cool about the new product is there's a Slack integration. So there's an email widget where you can, it tags on to whether it's Mac Outlook, it works in Gmail, it works, and you can give someone thanks. And I think what's really cool is in this email widget, every employee's goals are transparent. And so this was a big culture change and a culture shift. But why should they be hidden? If you want to achieve alignment, if you want to understand where somebody's focused or what their priorities are, put it out there so you can have a conversation. So goals are transparent on the widget. I can give any employee thanks. And this goes into the performance management system so the manager can reference this feedback. It helps to sort of combat some of the recency bias that would typically happen with performance reviews when they were done at the end of the year. And the pre-populated hashtags tie out to our operating principles, but you can also make up your own hashtags as well. So you can see it feeds through to a hashtag kudos Slack channel. There's an online recognition wall. There's also a mobile app. And I can then easily go in and check and see my employees' feedback. Also, in the email widget, for your direct reports, you'll see a button here that says Save for One-on-One. And you can quickly make a note for your employee, make it private or public, and save a note of something you need to remind them of. There's morale tracking that's, again, incorporated on the widget in the platform. And I think what's nice with goals is on the right-hand pane, we've pulled in company goals, T&P goals for reference and awareness. 360 reviews are easy to customize. And during a review, feedback will pull forward on the right-hand window as well. Okay, so we're just about over. So what does the future look like? So just 2 slides. So this is the evolution of management thinking And I thought this Deloitte person did this slide, and I think this is interesting because it sort of shows the shift from the industrial age, where it was all about operational efficiency. I'm thinking it's like Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, and Corporate's King, to hierarchical leadership with Jack Welch. It was management by objective to a more probably right between collaborative management and network of teams. A network of teams is we're shifting again, mission, purpose, empowering the team, the Agile team. And I thought this was neat too, the simply irresistible organization. So you've got meaningful work, autonomy in small teams, great management, coaching, feedback, modernized performance management, fantastic environment, growth opportunities, and trust in leadership. So with that, I want to hear from you. So let's open this up. Feel free to, if you want to talk about what you're doing in your organization, maybe what's most important to you, any questions or thoughts?
I have a question. It's more of a clarifying question. So performance management, the philosophy of performance management has always been that we may have a tool. It may be released, once a year, thrice a year, twice a year. But the person who really owns the performance management is the leader. So it's the leader who's, supposed to constantly have conversations. And I've led large teams, so I, try to practice that as well, right? So, you constantly have conversations with the employee, make sure that the employee knows what the expectations are. So long as they know what the expectations are, you can also give them feedback against those expectations on an ongoing basis. And the feedback isn't twice a year or once a year, the feedback is ongoing and it's constructive and it's also two-way. So it's the manager also asking the employee, how am I doing? So what I'm hearing from Agile HR is that philosophy is not necessarily changing. It's actually how do we really, and typically leaders have used the tool to lead the process, whereas Agile HR is more about the leader leading the process and having the tool behind him to support him. Am I getting that?
Yeah, and I think also too, I think that one thing too that we're seeing, part of the paradigm shift that we're seeing as well is it not just being the leader, but the employees driving it as well. So the employees maybe initiating their goals, or the employees initiating a 360 and asking for feedback, or the employees helping to drive their career. So it's not just, so I still think the managers still play a really pivotal role, and there's a lot that you see in this focus that it's a coaching feedback, and we need to enhance and evolve the manager capability in being able to do that. But what we actually, the Spotify model that and then the tool we built, it was all about drive your career. It was all actually at Spotify, we put it back on the employee. But what was interesting was I didn't really see it take off. So as we've been launching this at Comcast, we've tried to sort of fuel a culture of empowerment, right? So accountability, empowerment. So it's not just top down, I'm waiting for this to be done to me. But I don't think it's an either or, because I saw it sort of fall flat at Spotify. Because I think if you shift it 100% and the culture's not ready for it, it's just gonna. So I think you make a good point.
So then I have a leading on question from there,
Yeah.
which is, sorry, I don't mean to take on the entire conversation, but on one side it's empowering the employee and creating that that sense of I want to really drive my own career. But on the leader's side, then really in the past, if the system hasn't worked, and that
Yes.
slide that you had up there, a lot of that actually is probably because of, and I'm just going to make a statement out there, it's because of managers, of managers not really doing what they should be doing and the way they should be doing it. How do you make this an enduring culture?
Exactly, yeah.
So
yeah.
that's just a question that.
Yeah, that's actually, you know what, and I'm actually working with actually a coach on this who's trying to help, and she made a really good point in that, like, you can't, to create a culture shift, you can't just toolkit it. Like a toolkit is not going to create a paradigm shift or a cultural shift. And what she recommended is, she said, you should have pod discussions or cross-functional collaboration groups or discussion groups that, like, you really need to sort of take, you need to get out there, discuss the content, and have it be sort of grassroots and have the right change management effort in order to get, you know, in order to create sort of like a self-fulfilling cultural change in a system that's going to, because otherwise, like, a toolkit, it's like somebody may go to that website or may pull that one pager, but they may not. And so I think that it's like you have to be really thoughtful and deliberate about the tactics and the multi-pronged approach. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned that you had transitioned from Spotify to Comcast, and you kind of briefly discuss some of the different processes that were being implemented at both companies. I was wondering if you could discuss in more detail kind of how the HR kind of organizations differ at those companies, and, you know, how they affect where both companies are going in the future.
Sure, no, definitely. And I think that, like, it's like you almost like couldn't have like two polar, like the poles are different. So I mean, Spotify was still very much a startup. It was very much like startup mentality, where you had different hubs. So the Spotify headquarters is in Stockholm, and the second big office was in London, and then New York was sort of open later, but then sort of rose in like authority. And then there's a lot of global offices that were very small. So I think when it came to it so each group sort of functioned almost like independently. And so I think that sometimes there wasn't really, when it came to, and you were very at Spotify, it's like you're very focused on, it's like getting to launch, getting to growth, getting to metrics. So I think that there was a lot of, like, the founder, Daniel Ek, was really close with Facebook. And so I felt like a lot of sometimes like Facebook's culture or Facebook's like hacker mentality came through in Spotify. And Daniel used to say, like, see a problem, fix a problem. So it indexed super high on collaborative, super high on just like hack it, solve it, get scrappy. So I think that it didn't have much structure. Whereas like Comcast, I think Comcast is a more established company it's huge, with a lot of different demographics, right? And so with a lot of different populations that have different motivations and needs. And I think that sometimes some of the processes or approaches or structures that they create for one Comcast, what I've seen didn't resonate with the technology population. But I think that sometimes where there's Comcast is under a lot more different types of scrutiny and actually it's like if Spotify goes down, it's okay. If X1 goes down, like, it's a big deal. So I think that it's like two different environments. But I think what's exciting about Comcast is it's, you know, we're able to change and we're able to pivot. We're going to be able to do like good, cool stuff for our technology teams. And I think that like Brian is really committed to product development, innovation, technology, and they're realizing, and to also the customer. And I think what they're realizing is, we were actually talking about this before we started, was you've got to, like, if you want to have happy customers, create products that, you know, please the customer, you've got to think about the employee population that's doing that. And then what kind of ecosystem are you creating for them? And so I think that we definitely have a lot of support to do things that are going to be, to help achieve that goal. And it's like a roundabout answer.
All right, I've got one.
All right.
Do managers make good coaches?
Do managers make good coaches? So I would say some do, but I think that it all depends on the individual, and I think that also I think that you see different pockets of different levels of sort of comfort, skill, aptitude, but I do think that. I think sometimes in technology there's so much focus and there's so much pressure on technical expertise, technical guidance. I mean, you know this, Joe. Like there's folklore at Comcast about our chief architect. He'll roll up his sleeves and he'll debug code, and everybody's like, wow, okay, I've got to be technical like he is. But but I think the thing is like. Technical is important, but it's also important to have the coaching skills, the development skills, the ability to cultivate and grow and set expectations and give feedback. And so that's a muscle. I think what people don't realize is you can't toolkit that. Like that is a muscle you have to develop just like you have to develop technical expertise. Great. Okay.
Why would you have disparate performance?
So partially because I'm proud of Bill Strahan for like supporting this, because we are, we're being agile, we're being iterative, and we're piloting different solutions. And I think that that's what's going to be great is come the close of this year, we'll be able to do a readout and how was technology and products pilot, and then there's another pilot that's going on with sales and marketing and a couple other groups. How is this pilot, and how's the legacy process, and what do we want to do? I think also too because I'm an advocate of, I think that there should, like Comcast it's almost like a holding company. So where there are, if you think of it from a holding company perspective, where there are different business units with different types of talent, with different motivations, different challenges, different needs. And so and you need to be able to build a process or a system that's going to address that and also help to motivate what you need to get out of that group. So I think we're going to evaluate it and we're going to see, but I'm glad that they're open to trying and learning. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.